Hello, and welcome to Chapter 2 of my build and modifications of the Balsa USA 1/4 scale Spad 13. This is a video of still pictures that I took during the construction of the Spad 13, and also of any modifications or any issues I may have come up with during the construction. As I left Chapter 1, the wings and the wings modification have been completed, and now we're moving on to the fuselage construction. This first series of pictures will show the cabane strut anchor points being attached to the fuselage, and also we'll be looking at the jig that was required to set the proper attachment points for the upper wing. This jig will set the proper height above the fuselage, but more importantly will also set the proper incidence for the wing. As you can see, the brackets have two holes into them because this is where the actual wing separation point will be. One bolt will go into the outboard wing and one bolt will go into the center section. This is where the wings will be separated when it gets to that point. So now the cabane struts are installed, and all that's left is to finally put the wings on and see exactly what it's going to look like. Surprisingly, it didn't come out too bad. The wings bolted together without much difficulty, and it actually starts to look like a Spad. The wing bolt holes lined up with the brackets, and it was relatively easy to put the bolts into the T-nuts, which were already anchored inside the wing. So I was very pleased that it came out and seemed to work very, very well. With the cabane struts now satisfactorily completed, it was time to move on to the struts and the interplane struts. These basically were basically 1/8 steel wire. I had to fabricate the feet that would be attached to the hard points on the wings, and as you can see, the process was fairly straightforward, and once everything was lined up, it was a matter of just soldering the feet to the wires and also installing the diagonal brace wires. And this process went along fairly nice, and I was very pleased with the results on that. With the struts now completed, it was time to tackle the flying wires. I did want to have flying wires that would be partially functional so that when the wings were separated, they would have something to hold them together. This involved making up the brass brackets, as you can see here, and then attaching them with wires, with crimps, and coming up with at least a reasonable facsimile of what the real Spad had, which was basically double flying wires on the positive G and single flying wire on the negative G. Once I was satisfied with the flying wires, it was time to move on to the landing gear. I was not really happy with the plans built landing gear configuration, so I decided that I would try a modification to come up with something a little more scale and actually operate as a individual bungee sprung system. This was my first attempt at this and was definitely in uncharted waters. The landing gear wires were bound together with copper wire and soldered, after which the balsa and plywood fairing covers were attached to the landing gear wires. Once the fairings were installed, a slot was cut and an axle was installed across the span between the two gear, and a bungee cord, in this case rubber band, was used to provide the spring action. Seemed to be functional, seemed to work okay, but I had lingering doubts at this point. At any rate, I now had a functioning landing gear, and it was time to see just what this airplane was going to look like. So here it is in its bare bones glory. At least it gives me an idea of the physical size and what it's going to look like, and actually how does this landing gear work. And as you can see in this picture coming up, I'll give you a general idea how that landing gear worked. Just solid wire across with rubber bands to give me the action I required. So there it sits, much taller than I thought initially, quite the nose-high elevation. Now the dreaded moment has arrived. It's time to separate the wings. Didn't know exactly what this was going to work out like. Basically took a razor saw, took the back off of it so it was just the blade, and started cutting away. Unfortunately, I was a little aggressive, I think, on my gluing, so some of it was a little bit more difficult than I thought it should be. But at any rate, as you can see, it did come out, and overall, we're ready to go. So now the moment of truth has arrived. The struts, interplane struts, the flying wires were all attached to the wings in preparation to separate them from the fuselage and the cabane, to see if my modifications actually will work or whether they're destined for the dust heap of time. So here is everything together, looking like it's supposed to, and just waiting to see if they're going to come apart. Success! They slid out perfectly. No problems, the wings stayed together, everything acted exactly the way I wanted it to. Very pleased at this point. As this was getting late into my traditional building season, and basically coming into late spring, it was time to put the model away and basically maybe just tackle a smaller project. The Spad has two Vickers machine guns that are prominently mounted on the nose. So I wanted to have something that would fit in there and also look scale. Balsa USA does offer a kit that basically I purchased, separate guns each, and proceeded to go ahead and put these together. Basically cardboard tube, thin plywood veneer, and balsa wood, and a fair amount of time, but kind of enjoyable. And basically I was going to have a set of scale Vickers machine guns. Of course, once I had completed these guns, I found a plastic model that basically was much better scale looking than these, but at this point I had so much into it, I said I'll go with these. If I'm not really happy at the end of the day, I can always change them out before the model is completely finished. So that's about it for this chapter. I hope you've enjoyed it. Stay tuned for chapter 3, which will be released sometime in late fall, I suspect. Thank you for watching. Have a great day. More to come.